Welcome. I'm Reverend Cindy Maybeck, and if you are watching this, then there has been a lot of snow, at least enough to deter me from being in the sanctuary in person. I wanted to tell you some snow stories. When the snow is falling thick and heavy, we can't help thinking of blizzards. Now, I know you would tell stories about the blizzard of '78, but for me, I like stories of the blizzard of '66. Do you know about that one? Anyone who was in upstate New York at the time remembers. There was 103 inches of snow in Oswego. In one day, 3.5 feet of snow fell in Syracuse, but the blizzard itself lasted 5 or 6 days with incredible winds. My brother and I were staying with my grandparents, and what I recall, when finally the plows came out to plow the sidewalks, my grandpa took us around the block. Now, granted, I was short at age 5, but I remember walking through these tunnels with walls of snow higher than my head. And I remember snowdrifts covering windows in the second floor of houses nearby. It was incredible. And we made snow angels and snow forts and snowmen. We were there because my parents were on a ski weekend in Vermont. My mom had experienced skiing in Norway as a youth. My dad had never skied, but as an Eagle Scout, Boy Scout in his youth, he was always prepared to try something new. Well, it always happens this way, right? The end of a long day, and they were both tired, and the sun had not set, so it was this, let's just take one more run down the mountain. And so they did, soaring down on their skis. My mom in the front and my dad saw the tumble, head over skis, which never fell off, head over skis. And when he finally arrived to where my mom lay sprawled on her back in the snow, she asked him, "Is my leg broken?" as she lay with her back in the snow and the ski and her toes pointing into the snow. My dad said, "Yeah." They managed to rescue her off that mountain and take her to the hospital, and there was some serious surgery. And of course, my dad was now staying at the ski chalet, not just for a few days, but for many, many weeks. The bills began to pile up. It may be hard to remember, but in 1966, not only was there no worldwide internet or no cell phones, there also weren't credit cards. At least young married couples didn't have them. It was a matter of putting cash in your wallet and heading out, and when your money ran out, you stopped spending. But there was my dad with bills piling up. Being a Boy Scout, be prepared. He had his checkbook with him, and he went to the bank to cash a check, and they told him they didn't cash out-of-state checks. When he explained the situation, his wife in the hospital, his children home with the in-laws, he at the chalet needing to stay there to care for his wife. It was a desperate situation, and he was good for the money. How do we know? Asked the banker. How does one prove one's integrity in a strange land? I'm good for it, my father insisted. Tell you what, why don't you have the vice president of your bank give me a call, and then we'll see if your check is good. What's the name of the vice president of Columbia Savings Bank in Rochester? My dad did not know. Frightened, dejected, angry, he stormed out of the bank. He had left his car in the snowdrift in which it was stuck just to walk from chalet to hospital and back again. He was now at the bank and took a different road, and as he happened along, by now it was getting dark, he noticed a church, the First Baptist Church, with a house next to it, a light on the door, and he knocked on the door, and a very nice woman let him in. She was the pastor's wife. He explained his situation, that he was a stranger, that he was in need, and she and her husband served tea and homemade Toll House cookies. He said, "This is lovely." She said, "I have to ask, do you have a church back home?" He said, "Yes, my family and I attend Emmanuel Baptist Church." "Oh," she said, Is that where Irma Brown is? Why, yes. Dick Brown is the minister and Irma is his wife. And she said, well, Irma's my cousin's sister-in-law. And off they went in regaling tales. And at the end of the conversation, the pastor assured my dad, after handing him some cash, that anything he needed for any bills would be covered. And my dad assured him, I will pay it back as soon as I return home. And the pastor said, oh, Mr. Maybeck, pay it forward. Well, it was weeks later that my dad arrived at my grandparents' house with my mom cast from her toes to her hip and laid out in the back of the Dodge station wagon. Dad told us the whole crazy story. And Mom let us sign her cast with magic marker. And my dad said to me, Cindy, if you're ever in trouble, go to the church. And I have. I have. I'm not sure in a big heavy snowfall there's anything more fun than watching dogs play in the snow. Well, actually, watching children play in the snow. Oh, more fun than that. Watching someone who has never seen snow before play in the snow. Well, we've had 3 dogs, and all of them large, thick fur coats, snow-loving kind of dogs. And so it's a great joy to be outdoors in the snow with the dogs. Our dog Toby was a shepherd collie mix, black fur coat, tan markings, pointy ears, and a very assured, confident, dignified kind of dog. And we would walk him in the neighborhood, and he always seemed to know what he was doing. Except at certain times in the winter when the sidewalks had not been plowed, we ended up on the street which had been plowed and treated. We'd be walking along, careful for cars of course, but we'd be walking along and all of a sudden he would stop, lift a paw, and look pathetic. What's wrong? We'd try to get him going. He wouldn't. Come on. And then we realized there was salt in the snow. And so with our mittened hands, Elaine or I would wipe his paw off and say, you're okay. And off he'd go again. And again, we would have to wipe the paw with our mittened hands. It was very annoying. Slowed down the walk. We needed to do something about this. Well, the next winter, before the snow fell, we found a new product, doggy booties. We ordered them right away and they arrived in a package and they were very convenient. We'd gotten the large size for the large dog and they were a nylon product and they had an elastic around like the, I don't know, wrist, ankle, and then Velcro to tighten it. And it was soft and cushy and there would be no way for sand or salt or wetness to get in. So we decided to try it out. So we put these 4 booties on his 4 paws and we take him outside and we decide to play and he's a little hesitant and then one of us runs over and he starts to run after us and all 4 paws, splat, he's on the driveway. And he gets himself up and he starts to run and again, splat. It was like one of those cartoon characters where they're on ice and all of their feet and arms are flailing and they can't, I have to say it was like slapstick comedy and I have to say we laughed. Apparently, a dog needs to feel contact between the pads and whatever ground he is walking on. And so the idea of putting doggy booties on a dog, it just didn't work. And that's why in the thickest snow, heaviest snow of the winter, we might be found more often snowshoeing through the woods where there was no plows and no salt on the roads. It was wintertime and I was at a retreat working with a Jesuit priest on the Ignatian spiritual exercises. It was an 8-day silent retreat, a big, beautiful retreat house with grounds to walk on, and the meals were lovely. And there were a number of adults on this retreat, but we never spoke to one another. And we would see one another in the cafeteria. I might sit alone at a table and there'd be a colleague a ways over. We might see each other in a chapel praying, and in that case I would hold my colleague in prayer, and I had a sense that their prayers were coming towards me as well. Well, one night it started to snow heavily, and the winds were howling, and it went long into the night. And there was this huge fire someone had built in this gorgeous stone fireplace with a big stone mantel and a deep hearth and old-fashioned black andirons holding these big logs. And oh my goodness, the retreatants were like moths to a flame. One at a time, people arrived in this big great room with the fire glowing. I settled myself in a big wing-back chair. I had a white china mug full of hot cocoa with those little white marshmallows on top. And soon there were 4 or 5 of us sitting around the fire in silence. Until the fellow across from me said, "Used to snow like this where I came from. We had big blizzards when I was a kid." Well, I remember the blizzard of '66, as you know, and I mentioned that. And pretty soon, one by one, we find ourselves in conversation. Oh, there was a prison chaplain on retreat who was working in a prison with women and providing a kind of trusting circle of conversation that these women had never experienced before. And there was this way of confidence building and healing and caring that was just beginning to encircle them. There's a fellow who had been down in Guatemala and had been working with impoverished people in base communities and meeting in house churches and building up a sense of love and community. I told stories about being a woman in the church as a clergy person and the various challenges that I had to overcome, which made that fellow in the other wingback chair speak up as well. "We have that same situation in my setting," he said. "There are so many religious sisters who have the gift of preaching. I mean, their teaching is amazing. Their homilies are beautiful. The writing exquisite. And so God tells us to use gifts. And so as there were so many of us, we just took turns in Mass, and often a religious sister was the one to bring the homily, and all of us were blessed. Until someone reported it to the bishop. And you know how these hierarchies are. We were told to cease and desist. There was to be no more homilies by women. And we took it to prayer, and God wanted us to lift all of the ministries of all of the men and the women in the community. And then we had this brilliant notion. You see, we were told that if there was a woman who was found to give a homily, our ministry would be stopped, defunded, ended. And so the women continued to be readers. And occasionally when one of the women would do a reading, she might continue to offer some reflections on it. Then there would be the gospel that the priest would do, and then there would be the homily. And in the homily, the priest would say, "As our sister has shared, thanks be to God," and sit down. And so, perhaps we were following the letter of the law, but the spirit was to lift up the voices of all of God's people. We continued to share stories of justice and prophecy and resistance and mercy and love, and late into the night until there was only a bed of warm embers in that hearth. And one by one, we left that place and went back into our individual rooms, and the snow continued to fall. By morning, the sun rose, the snow had stopped, there were blankets of white across every surface of the outdoors, so silent. And each of us fell back into our silence as well, in retreat to meet God.